We like to believe that we invented economics. We tell ourselves that the complex machinery of global finance, the central banks, the stock markets, the derivatives, the hedge funds, are modern inventions born from the minds of geniuses like Adam Smith, John Maynard Keynes, or Milton Friedman. We look at the skyline of New York or London and see progress. But what if I told you that the sickness killing our modern economy isn't new? And the poor, the collapse of trust in our currency, were diagnosed with terrifying accuracy nearly 1,000 years ago. Long before the first stock was traded in Amsterdam, long before the Medici family opened the first bank vault in Italy, long before the Federal Reserve printed its first dollar, a man sat in a stone room in the ancient city of Damascus, writing a warning to the future. He didn't use spreadsheets, but he understood something that today's PhD economists have forgotten. He warned that when money is detached from reality, when it becomes a product instead of a tool, civilization doesn't just go bankrupt. It rots. It decays from the inside out until the walls come crashing down. For centuries, Western history has ignored him. But as our debt piles up to $300 trillion and our currencies lose their value by the day, his words are no longer just philosophy. Welcome to the Financial Historian. Today we aren't just reading history. This is the story of Al-Ghazali and the 900-year-old warning that we ignored at our own peril. To understand the warning, you first have to understand the world that created it. If you were living in Europe at this time, you were likely living in mud. But to the east, the world was on fire with brilliance. Baghdad was the center of the world, a metropolis of 1 million people when London was just a village. The Abbasid Caliphate controlled trade routes that stretched from the gold mines of Africa to the silk looms of China. The dinar was the dollar of the medieval world, the universal currency accepted from Spain to India. It was a time of unimaginable wealth. Merchants weren't just traders, they were tycoons. Ships sailed the Indian Ocean carrying spices worth more than their weight in gold. Scholars in the House of Wisdom were translating Aristotle and inventing algebra. But beneath the gold plating, the foundation was cracking. Just like the 1920s in America or the 2000s in the West, this era of prosperity was hiding a deep, systemic rot. Inequality was exploding. The caliphs lived in palaces of marble, while the peasants struggled to buy bread. Corruption was rampant. In the marketplaces, a new kind of greed was taking root. Men were no longer just trading goods, they were manipulating money itself. Into this glittering, dangerous world stepped Abu Hamid Al-Ghazali. Born in 1058 in Persia, he was a prodigy. By his early 30s, he was effectively the intellectual chancellor of the empire. He had fame, power, and the ear of the Sultan. He was the most respected scholar of his age. He had everything a man could want. In 1095, at the height of his power, Al-Ghazali had a nervous breakdown. He stood at the pulpit to give a lecture, but no words came out. He was paralyzed by a realization that shattered his worldview. He looked at the society around him, the wealth, the politics, the elite, and he saw it for what it truly was, a hollow shell. He realized that the entire economic and social structure was built on arrogance and greed. So he did the unthinkable. He put on the robes of a poor traveler and walked away from Baghdad. Spent the next decade wandering in the desert, meditating in the mosques of Damascus and Jerusalem. And in that silence he wrote his masterpiece, The Revival of the Religious Sciences. But buried inside this massive religious text was a hidden gem, a detailed surgical analysis of economics. He didn't write it to get rich. He wrote it to explain why empires fall. Ask a modern economist, and they will give you a technical definition. They will say it is a store of value, a unit of account, and a medium of exchange. Al-Ghazali gave a different definition, a poetic one. Does a mirror have a color? If you put a red apple in front of a mirror, the mirror becomes red, but on its own. God created gold and silver, he said, to act as judges between all other commodities. A camel is not equal to a pile of wheat. Money was created to bridge that gap. It is the judge that determines value. But here is the crucial part, the part we have forgotten today. Al-Ghazali argued that because money is a mirror, it must have no value of its own. Its only purpose is to move goods from person A to person B. It is a bridge. It is a truck. It is a tool. But what happens when you start treating the mirror as the painting? What happens when you treat money as a commodity? Something to be bought, sold, rented, and hoarded. Al-Ghazali wrote, "Money is not created to be sought for itself. Whoever uses money as an end in itself is ungrateful to the bounty of God and is like one who uses a hammer to smash his own hand." Identified the first great sin of economics, hoarding. In the medieval world, rich merchants would bury chests of gold to keep it safe. Today we call it liquidity traps or offshore accounts. Al-Ghazali despised this. He used a biological metaphor that was centuries ahead of his time. If blood flows through the body lives, nourishes the organs, the muscles, the brain. But if blood stops flowing, if it pools in one place, it clots, the organ dies. When the wealthy hoard money, they are literally stopping the bloodstream of society. They create artificial scarcity. He understood the velocity of money 900 years before Fisher's equation. He warned that a society where money sits idle in the vaults of the 1% is a society that is slowly suffocating. If hoarding was a sickness, Al-Ghazali identified a second, more deadly disease. Now, in Islamic law, riba is usually translated as usury or interest. But Al-Ghazali's analysis went deeper than just interest is bad. He analyzed the mechanics of risk. If I start a bakery, I take a risk. No one might buy it. If I succeed, I deserve the profit. I added value to the world. But Al-Ghazali looked at the moneylenders of his time and the bankers of ours and saw a violation of natural law. Saw people making money from money without risk. He wrote, "Whoever rents out money for money is forcing a barren woman to give birth. Money cannot give birth to more money. It is sterile. Only work creates value. When you lend $100 and demand 110 back, regardless of the outcome, you are placing a tax on time itself. You are profiting from the passage of days." Fast forward to 2008. What was the global financial crisis? It was a system where banks created complex derivatives, bets on top of bets on top of bets, or trading money for money. They weren't funding businesses. They were gambling on the movement of numbers. Al-Ghazali warned that when an economy shifts from production, making things, to speculation, betting on things, the foundation turns to sand. He argued that this creates a parasitic class. A class of people who get richer not by contributing to society, but by extracting wealth from it. He called it oppression, but perhaps his most terrifying prediction was reserved for the government itself. Al-Ghazali looked at the kings and sultans of his time and saw a scam that is still running today. In the 11th century, if a king wanted to fight a war but didn't have enough gold, he would cheat. He would melt down the gold coins, mix in cheap copper, and recast them. Suddenly, 100 coins became 120 coins. The king felt richer. He could pay his soldiers. But the people? Their money was now worth less. The bread that cost 1 dinar now cost 2. Al-Ghazali was furious. He wrote one of the harshest condemnations of government monetary policy in history. He said, "A ruler who debases the currency is worse than a thief. A thief steals from one man. The ruler steals from everyone." He understood that inflation is not an accident, it is a policy, it is a hidden tax. When a government prints money to pay its debts, it is stealing purchasing power from your pocket. It is eroding the trust that holds society together. History proves him right, over and over again. The Roman Empire collapsed when they diluted the silver and the denarius to almost zero. China's Yuan dynasty collapsed when they printed too much paper money. Weimar Germany, Zimbabwe, Venezuela, Lebanon. Every time a ruler thinks they can cheat the mirror shatters. Al-Ghazali warned that money is a social contract. It works only because we believe it works. Trust that this piece of paper or this digital number represents real value. But if the state abuses that trust, if they print it into infinity, the belief evaporates. And when the belief dies, the currency goes to zero. Look at the US dollar today. Since 1971, it has lost 98% of its purchasing power against gold. Al-Ghazali would look at our Federal Reserve, our quantitative easing, and our $34 trillion debt, and he would say only one thing: the theft is complete. But Al-Ghazali's diagnosis went even deeper than just kings and coins. He looked at the psychology of the common man. He identified a force that destroys economies faster than any tax is envy. In his time, he saw merchants who weren't just trying to feed their families, they were trying to crush their rivals. He wrote that when a society measures success solely by accumulation, it enters a state of perpetual anxiety, he warned. Competition for worldly gain is a fire that consumes the heart. Today, we call this consumerism. Our entire modern economy is built on convincing you to buy things you don't need. With money you don't have, to impress people you don't like. Al-Ghazali argued that this creates a scarcity mindset. Even when there is enough food for everyone, the fear of missing out makes people hoard. It turns neighbors into enemies, turns partners into rivals. And what happens when an entire civilization runs on envy? You get what we have today, a world where we have more wealth than any time in history, yet depression and anxiety are at record highs. We are rich in goods, but bankrupt in spirit. Finally, Al-Ghazali turned his pen toward the elite. He didn't hate the rich. In fact, Islam encourages trade and profit. But he laid down a strict condition for the wealthy: communal obligation. He argued that if a single person in the city dies of hunger while another has surplus gold, the entire city has sinned. He believed that wealth is not owned by you, it is entrusted to you. You are a manager, not a master. Compare that to the philosophy of modern shareholder capitalism. Today, a CEO's only legal duty is to maximize profit for shareholders. If he has to fire 5,000 workers to make the stock price go up by $1, he is praised as a genius. Al-Ghazali would call him a criminal. He warned that when the elite detach themselves from the suffering of the masses, they are digging their own graves. Because eventually, the masses stop asking for bread and start sharpening their swords. So why does this matter? Why should we care what a medieval monk thought about money? Because Al-Ghazali wasn't just talking about coins, he was talking about civilization. His ultimate warning was that you cannot separate economics from morality. Western capitalism tries to tell us that the market is neutral, the invisible hand will fix everything. That if everyone is greedy, society will somehow benefit. Al-Ghazali said, no. He argued that the market is a reflection of the human heart. The hearts of the people are corrupt if they prioritize quick profit over honest work. If they prioritize hoarding over sharing, then the market will become an engine of destruction. He saw economics as a moral ecosystem. You cannot have a healthy economy in a sick society. When we look at our world today, a world where hedge funds buy up single-family homes, forcing regular people to rent for life, a world where pharmaceutical companies profit from keeping people sick, a world where politicians trade stocks based on insider laws they write, we are seeing exactly what Al-Ghazali predicted. We are seeing the rot from the inside out. He warned that when the link between effort and reward is broken, society dissolves. When a man can make more money clicking a button on a trading app than a farmer can make feeding a village, the end is near. Al-Ghazali eventually returned from the desert. He taught for a few more years, then died in his hometown in 1111 CE. The empires he lived in eventually crumbled. The Golden Age ended. The trade routes shifted. But his warning remains, etched into the fabric of history. We are living in the greatest financial bubble in human history. We have turned money into a god. We have turned debt into a product. We have turned speculation into a religion. We thought we were smarter than the ancients. Thought we had conquered the laws of nature with our algorithms and our central banks. But history is a ledger, and in the long run, the books must always balance. The debt we have accumulated, not just financial debt, but moral debt, is coming due. The mirror is cracking, and when it finally breaks, we cannot say we weren't warned. I am the economic historian. If you want to survive the crash that is coming, you first have to understand the history that predicted it. Subscribe and remove the blindfold.